Welcome to the Vibes Lab, your front row seat to the science behind VIA, the Vibes AI agentic platform making everyday brain health accessible to all. Every episode is designed to reveal insights that will enhance your cognitive health and well-being. Follow us to grab your lab key and experience limitless intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are doing a deep dive into a concept that I think for most of us, we treat as pure metaphor. Just wishing for something. But today, we're analyzing sources that treat it as a measurable physical force. We're talking about focused intention.
That's absolutely our mission here.
Yeah.
To elevate intention from just self-help into the borderlands of, measurable physics. We're really anchored in sources that start with core neuroscience, but then they immediately ask this bigger question.
Well, which is?
Can this highly refined internal focus actually influence the external world, at a distance?
And that anchor is so critical because we are definitely not talking about wishful thinking here.
No, right.
We pulled a definition from the sources that really grounds this idea. It says, intention is a directed mental state that, it doesn't just feel purposeful. It actually shows up physically as a highly organized electromagnetic and biophotonic activity.
Right.
And the claim is that this focused thought operates as a highly coherent frequency that's capable of literally altering biological matter.
Yeah, and think of it this way. When we say a coherent frequency, we're talking about the opposite of, the chaotic, messy static of everyday thought.
Right.
When your mind is truly focused and aligned, your internal systems, your nervous system, your brain waves, they're all firing in an organized, harmonic way.
Yeah.
And that highly ordered signal is what these researchers believe is the active component, the thing that, potentially has the power to affect physical reality.
And we know this directed state isn't just some fluffy abstraction. You said neuroscience gives us the foundation for this.
It does.
So for anyone listening who might not be familiar with the technical side, can you just quickly ground us in why we know intention is a physical, measurable process to begin with?
Certainly. Yeah. Standard neuroscience, going back to studies that are often called Libet-style experiments, they track the neural signatures of intent. Now, these are complex studies. But the main takeaway for us is that the intention to act, like to move your finger or speak a word, it unfolds over measurable milliseconds in the brain before you're even consciously aware you've made the decision.
So it's not instantaneous.
Not at all.
Right.
It's a measurable physiological preparation. It's a unique electrical signature you can actually track. And this measurable foundation, that's what gives us the footing to even start exploring the more challenging idea of non-local effects.
That distinction is everything. Going from a chaotic signal to this high-fidelity, coherent frequency. And we're using that measurable internal definition as the groundwork before we, leapfrog into the more contested territory of distant or field effects.
Exactly. And our primary guide through that frontier is the work of a journalist researcher named Lynne McTaggart.
Right. Let's talk about her. She's the bridge. The sources are very clear to define her not as a traditional lab scientist, but as a meticulous journalist researcher. Her whole job is to synthesize these ideas that often live on the periphery, from frontier physics, consciousness science, parapsychology. But the key thing is she doesn't just synthesize them.
No, she tests them.
She tests them.
And she tests them at a truly astonishing scale. She uses this unique methodology based on large-scale, global, crowd-based participation. She gets thousands of people all over the world to focus their intention at the same time on one single isolated target. She calls them the intention experiments.
The scale is just.
Yeah.
It's what sets her work apart. The sources report she has run more than 40 of these intention experiments over several years, and she's collaborating directly with university-based scientists to make sure there's independent measurement and controls.
Right.
Now, here's the claim that just makes you take a deep breath and, bring on the skepticism. The sources report that 38 of those experiments showed positive, often statistically significant changes in the target.
38 out of 40. That is an extraordinary success rate for any scientific discipline, let alone one dealing with something like non-local mental influence. It immediately requires us to acknowledge the massive friction this creates with the mainstream scientific community. Because when data appears to defy established physical laws like influence without any physical connection, the standard for proof just skyrockets.
It has to. If you hear a claim like 38 out of 40 worked, your first thought has to be, okay, where's the flaw?
Exactly.
Is it the controls? Is it measurement bias? The reason these sources are so compelling is that the experiments seem to be designed to address that skepticism. And the targets are so diverse, it challenges the idea of a simple methodological error.
Precisely. Her targets aren't just, subjective human reports. They're exploring fundamental material reality.
Yeah.
The experiments have focused on influencing things like basic plant growth, the actual structure of water, measuring violence rates in certain regions, and even clinical outcomes like PTSD symptoms.
Wow.
So this broad success rate suggests, at the very minimum, that focused intentions is doing something systematic that researchers just haven't accounted for yet in the statistical noise.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to move past the stats and look at the concrete examples, what actually changed. The sources give these fantastic little stories from the trials, and they always emphasize the controlled designs. Shielded controls, blinded measurements to prevent bias.
Let's start with the biological stuff, the simplest targets.
Yeah.
The seeds and plants trials. These were done in collaboration with Gary Schwartz's lab, and they were looking at common barley seed germination.
And the setup was a perfect test of that non-local idea, right? McTaggart's global audience, sometimes thousands of people all over the world.
Across all different time zones.
And they're all focusing on making one specific set of seeds grow faster or better than an identical control set sitting thousands of miles away in a lab.
And the finding. After the intention periods, subsequent measurement reportedly revealed extra growth in the target trays versus the controls in several of the trials. And the difference, while it was subtle, it was consistently found to be statistically significant, always in favor of the intention group.
That is just a phenomenal claim, and it sticks in your mind. The sources paint this really vivid picture, something like, imagine 700 people from London to Sydney holding a tray of barley seeds in their mind for 10 minutes.
Right.
And then 5 days later, in a lab in Arizona, that specific tray looks measurably different.
It implies intention is somehow crossing huge geographical distances to affect basic plant biology.
So if it can influence biology, the next logical question is, can it influence the fundamental structure of matter itself?
Which is exactly where the water and structure experiments went. These were done with a physical chemist, Rustam Roy, at Penn State. A very controlled design directing group intention at isolated water samples.
Okay, wait a minute. Are we really suggesting that water responds to thought? I mean, that sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
Yeah.
How rigorous was the method for measuring a change in water structure?
And that skepticism is exactly why they used a highly precise technique called Raman spectroscopy. So when you shine a laser on a water sample, the light scatters. And the way that light scatters, the Raman spectrum, is incredibly sensitive to how the molecules are vibrating and bonding. It basically gives you a molecular fingerprint of the water's structure and energy state.
So if the water molecules literally reorganize because of the intention, the spectroscopy machine would see a different energy profile, would look different to the machine.
Precisely. And the reported finding from that trial was profound. Group intention correlated with clear spectral changes during the intention periods. And Roy, who's a very seasoned physical chemist, he described the changes he measured as unlike anything previously seen in his lab in any normal physical or chemical experiment.
Wow.
It suggested that a focused mental state had induced a measurable, non-typical shift in how the water molecules were vibrating and cohering.
So the influence wasn't just on growth rates, it was potentially altering the very structure of the substance.
And from there, she also aimed at human systems on a collective scale, with the peace and social fields experiments.
Measuring peace seems inherently complex.
It is. But the setup involved focusing the global intention on reducing violence or tension in selected regions, often conflict zones. And preliminary reports correlated that focused global intention with measurable shifts in indicators like documented hostilities in the target area.
What's really compelling about that one, though, is they didn't just track the external world. They tracked the people doing the focusing.
Yes.
The sources say they measured shifts in participant stress biomarkers, so the act of generating this coherent positive focus might have effects that ripple outward, but it also creates measurable positive physiological effects right there in the person generating the intention.
And that's a perfect transition point. It shows the internal and external effects are linked. These compelling vignettes, they aren't just isolated claims by one journalist. This whole line of inquiry is actually supported by a broader scientific community. There are multiple points of evidence for these subtle mind-matter correlations.
Okay, let's connect the dots then. Where else is this kind of work happening? How is it being tested?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, You find organizations dedicated entirely to this frontier, like the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS. And what IONS does is synthesize dozens of these controlled distant intention experiments way beyond McTaggart's work.
So what does the IONS synthesis tell us? Are they focused on big dramatic changes or more on subtle, repeatable ones?
They're heavily focused on the subtle foundational changes, but under incredibly rigorous, often double-blind conditions. They look at things like water crystal formation using standardized protocols to see if positive intention affects the symmetry or, the beauty of the ice crystals that form. They also study food aesthetics.
Food aesthetics, that's an unusual target. Why would focusing on food change how it looks or tastes?
Well, the premise is the same as the water experiments. If intention can affect water structure, and water is a huge component of food, then it might subtly shift the crystallization or the molecular integrity of that food. The suggestion from the research is that positive group intention can measurably alter how water and foods crystallize, or even how they're experienced by blind tasters. It just reinforces this idea of intention as a subtle field shifting physical systems.
But this all hinges on a mechanism, right? We can look at the data points, but if we don't know how a thought travels across distance to change barley seeds in a lab, the whole thing kind of falls apart for mainstream science.
Absolutely.
The sources mention a speculative but testable mechanism involving light, specifically biophotons.
Right. This is where consciousness and light emission intersect. Biophotons are these ultra-weak photon emissions from biological tissues. Essentially, every cell in your body emits tiny, measurable amounts of light. And some researchers believe this light is actually critical for cellular communication.
So it's literally light that our cells use to organize and talk to each other, an internal guidance system.
Exactly. And a review of this literature suggested that strong emotional coherence, healing intentions, deep belief states, they may actually change the frequency and intensity of that cellular photon emission.
That brings us right back to coherence. So when a person generates that highly coherent frequency we started with, they aren't just having an organized thought.
Right.
Their physical body, down to the cellular level, is emitting a high-fidelity light signal.
That is the testable hypothesis. If we are emitting these coherent biophotons, maybe that is the carrier wave for influence. Instead of some completely unknown quantum field, we're looking at light, which is fundamental to energy transmission. It provides a potential pathway for intention to influence matter at a distance. It travels at the speed of light. It doesn't need a physical connection.
So this allows us to say that other labs, not just McTaggart's collaborators, are observing these small, but really intriguing mind-matter correlations. It's a compelling chain built on small, consistent data points.
But before we get to the application, we have to recap the frontier and, the friction. These findings are small. They're often contested, and they have absolutely not been fully absorbed into mainstream medicine or physics.
Of course not. The scientific establishment demands extremely high standards for proof, especially for something like non-local effects.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The results are challenging, but the key takeaway for you, the listener, based on this consistency, 38 out of 40 experiments reporting positive change, is that focused, shared intention seems to be more than just a positive mindset.
Yes.
It hints very strongly at a quantifiable physical or maybe field component that we're only just beginning to figure out how to measure.
And that leads directly to the practical application. The takeaway for you isn't about joining a global experiment tomorrow. It's about recognizing that the coherence you need for external influence has to begin internally. It ties right back to those grounded definitions of intention as a high-fidelity signal.
You mentioned some key internal concepts earlier, like HRV and this idea of physiological coherence. How does a global experiment with seeds connect back to your heartbeat?
Right. So HRV is heart rate variability. It's the slight, healthy variation in time between each of your heartbeats. When your HRV is high and rhythmic, it means your heart, brain, and nervous system are communicating efficiently. They're highly adaptable. That state is called physiological coherence.
And low HRV?
Low HRV, on the other hand, is associated with chronic stress and chaotic internal signaling. The sources are suggesting that true, powerful intention isn't just a thought, it's a whole system event.
So a coherent frequency isn't just an organized thought, it's an organized body.
Exactly.
If you're stressed, distracted, physiologically chaotic, the signal you emit, that biophoton frequency, is suggested to be weak and messy. It's like static on the radio.
That's the perfect analogy. So the practical takeaway from these sources is to use clear, emotionally coherent intention as a way of aligning your own physiology and attention first. When your system achieves that physiological coherence, when your mind and body are aligned, which you can track with HRV, your focus becomes that high-fidelity signal. You're basically raising the quality of the frequency you're emitting before you direct it anywhere.
That gives us a really actionable, practical frame. Before you start a big task or lead a group or try to solve a problem, you align your inner state first. You set a specific, clear focus, consciously raising your physiological coherence. It suggests your ability to affect outcomes even subtly. It starts with quality control on your own internal signal.
So if we accept the possibility, even for a moment, that focused intention really is a highly coherent frequency capable of altering basic biological matter and water structure, as these trials consistently suggest.
Then the whole movement from a simple neurological signature to a field effect, it requires us to radically reconsider where our personal leverage truly is.
And that's the final provocative thought for you to take away. We so often look outside ourselves for power, for technology, resources, external solutions. But maybe the real leverage, the ability to generate a truly influential, coherent frequency, lies entirely in improving our own physiological coherence. If your internal state dictates the quality of the signal you emit, how might fundamentally improving that internal coherence, which you can track and train with methods that enhance HRV, how might that amplify your ability to shape your immediate environment and potentially influence outcomes at a distance? It encourages you to explore your own internal state, not just for your health, but as the fundamental starting point for any external effect.